The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Hillary Clinton is running for president in 2016. Marco Rubio also announcing on the Republican side. We'll talk about him tomorrow. I have to tell you, Lewis, Hillary Clinton is the most qualified candidate to run for president of the United States in recent history and possibly ever. Do not confuse what I'm saying with me saying I agree with all of her views, that I'm supporting her candidacy, that I think it would be great to have another Clinton as president. I am merely saying that on paper, how can anyone argue that Hillary Clinton is not the most qualified candidate for president, Lewis?
I think it would be foolish to argue against that. I think you're right. Senator, First Lady, Secretary of State. It's a pretty impressive resume.
Let's look at Ronald Reagan, for example. When elected president, Ronald Reagan had broadcast football and baseball games on the radio. He acted in movies. He did some limited military service due to his poor eyesight. He was president of a union for actors called the Screen Actors Guild, and he was governor of California. Hillary Clinton has an undergraduate political science degree. She was president of the Wellesley Young Republicans. She organized strikes and has activism in her past. She went to law school. She was on the editorial board of the Yale Review of Law. She published scholarly articles in academic journals. She worked as an attorney. First lady to the governor of Arkansas, Bill Clinton. She knows exactly how governors work at the state level. Participated in 2 successful presidential campaigns. She knows exactly what a successful presidential campaign looks like from start to finish. She was first lady, meaning she knows the ins and outs of the White House better than any other candidate possibly could, the pragmatic realities of what the president's life is like, exactly what to expect. She was a senator. She negotiated with sitting presidents in that capacity. And she was Secretary of State. She participated in high-level negotiations with world leaders around the world. Which other candidate would have these types of existing relationships with just about every world leader? You might not like her politics. You might not like her as a person. I'm not sure which Democratic candidate I would like the best. We don't know who they will be. But she is uniquely qualified here.
And the question is, at what point do you say to yourself, okay, even though I don't like her and her policies, just her qualifications and her connections and her rapport with world leaders would make it worthwhile for her to be president over someone I might agree with on policy a little bit more?
Well, you have to weigh what's more important to you, right? So if you have, if you're looking at George W. Bush and Hillary Clinton and you say, I'm kind of just a moderate, and George Bush is a Republican and quite conservative, and Hillary Clinton is one of the more moderate Democrats, but look at the experience, look at the history, look at the existing relationships. If you're at all connected to reality, pragmatic and intelligent, you have to consider that Hillary Clinton may be the better option longer term. I don't know how each individual person's barometer will ultimately weigh in on this.
Could be. I get this Frank Underwood vibe from Hillary Clinton that I really don't like. But her qualifications are pretty amazing.
Authorities have now released the dashcam footage of the traffic stop, which led to police officer Michael Slager shooting Walter Scott in the back 8 times, killing him in South Carolina. Here in the video, we see the moments that led up to the fatal shooting, and you'll see the officer walking up to the vehicle, which is occupied by Walter Scott and another passenger, and you will see Walter Scott get out of the vehicle and run, reportedly because he was worried that he'd be arrested for late child support payments, which did lead to a warrant out for him. Let's take a look at the dashcam video. Fox News reporter Geraldo Rivera felt that the video completely exonerates Officer Michael Slager with regard to murder charges, which have been filed against the police officer. Let's see if we can understand exactly what Geraldo's argument is here.
Well, I'm extremely glad that they released the dash cam video because it gives context to the event. However horrific and tragic and outrageous the shooting in the back is, it shows that it started as a righteous traffic stop. There was a light out. There was a light out. The driver was acting very hinky, very edgy. He got out of the car, was told to get back in the car. Clearly, the officer involved was checking to see whether there were outstanding warrants. The victim knew there was the outstanding warrant for unpaid child support. He bolts. The officer runs after him. The taser comes out. There is a struggle. This part we don't see. You don't see, but there is a reliable, I think, eyewitness account that there is a struggle after the taser. So up until that point, the cop with his adrenaline pumping, now he's been in a physical tussle. Now, the perpetrator has reached for the taser allegedly. Now it gives you the context of his blood boiling. He has done everything professional, and now he's had this civilian has dared to physically have this altercation with the officer. Put that in the officer's head now. I think it saves him from the murder rap.
Well, listen, nobody was arguing that the traffic stop was bogus, right? I didn't hear that argument made at all, Louis, which is the entire traffic stop to begin with was bogus. It does seem that there was a brake light, a tail light out there. Rivera seems to be basing his assertion that this is not murder on the statute in South Carolina law, which says that for it to be murder, it requires malice aforethought, which is that the officer had to go into the entire incident intending to shoot Walter Scott. But that's not the way the law is written. This so-called malice aforethought can be generated instantly, right? It doesn't matter if he didn't go into the entire traffic stop with the intent to kill Walter Scott. What matters is when he made the decision to fire those 8 shots, which any reasonable police officer should assume could kill a person, was that warranted? And that's really what the case should hinge on.
I think, I don't like the argument in general. I don't think the video shows anything that would, it's pretty, and it seems like the guy is just trying to get away. In every video, the eyewitness, it seems like he's just trying to get away, and he didn't seem to be a violent person. So I think the second he perhaps started disobeying, pushing away, retreating, the officer could have thought, oh, this guy wants to disobey me. Well, I'm just going to kill him. And that seems like it could be malice.
And it's it's skipping several steps, which is what we know about the law in South Carolina, which is that the police officer to use force of death, force that could cause death, a deadly force against a suspect who is fleeing can only be applied if there's a reasonable suspicion that individual getting away would directly lead to the deaths or serious risk of others. This individual, as far as the officer knew, was not suspected of having killed anyone or any kind of violent act, so it would be a stretch to think that was a reasonable assumption. We will wait and see what happens with the case. We actually have charges here, which we often don't have in these cases, so I think we just need to wait and see, Louis, but Geraldo saying this exonerates the officer is ludicrous.
It's ludicrous. Ultimately, I think will it be murder? Will it be manslaughter? I don't know. I honestly, I would like to see a murder charge here.
Well, we have a murder charge, murder conviction. Yeah, absolutely. No vaccine, no welfare benefits, according to laws that are going to be adjusted in Australia, where the government will stop welfare payments to parents who refuse to vaccinate their children. This could cost anti-vaccine parents up to 11,000 Australian dollars in lost benefits. In the past, when a family in Australia with children didn't immunize, they were still able to receive child care welfare benefits if they had a philosophical, which could be anything, or religious objection to vaccines. And Prime Minister Tony Abbott says the rules are going to be tightened. There will be a much smaller number of religious and medical exemptions to the new laws. And that's it. We are extremely concerned about the risks posed to the rest of the population by families who do not immunize. Louis, this is going to get a lot of people very angry.
A lot of people over there and a lot of people over here.
Yeah.
This is that step that I think we are afraid to take over here. So we'll just have to see how it unfolds over there.
I do feel mixed about this, though, because it's focusing on the anti-vaccination only of poor people with children, right? Threatening to withhold welfare benefits for non-vaccination is focusing this on those who qualify for welfare benefits. And really, anti-vaccination is not a class problem. It's not a problem specifically within those who are in what would be considered the benefits class. In Australia, it never has been. Those who are not reliant on welfare are completely unaffected by this change. So while I agree that we need to really be serious and applying Australia's ideas to the US here, we need to be very serious about the risks of non-vaccination. This is being targeted at those who are poor. And I don't know that that's really the best way to go about something that is a problem that spans all economic classes.
Agreed. I think they probably thought of this as it's either a desperate move or they thought that this could solve part of the problem because, well, how are you going to enforce this on those who do have money and who do not, you don't have any leverage with them. So I'm not really sure, but if it's desperation or just if they're being, I don't know, what they would call pragmatic.
Last week, we told you that Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev has been found guilty. Now that case moves into the penalty phase, where the jury will decide whether it will be life in prison or the death penalty. The mother of Boston Marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev and Tamerlan Tsarnaev says that Americans are terrorists and that her sons are innocent. She did an interview with the website Vocative, conducted over the WhatsApp messaging application. And Zubeidat Tsarnaeva insisted that her Chechen sons are innocent, that they were framed, and that the United States ultimately will pay for framing them. Quote, "My sons are innocent as all those who are being killed by your country. Today they are killing Muslims, and tomorrow will come your turn. And he who doubts this is deeply mistaken. How can a mother feel whose son is in the claws of a predator, preparing to tear him to pieces like meat? They will pay for my sons and the sons of Islam permanently. The tears of their mothers will be fuel for them in hell, and also their blood. And I am doubtless and eternally glad that I know this from the words of the Creator, not just anyone's words." I don't pretend to know what it's like to have one son killed and another tried and convicted of a heinous crime of worldwide recognition and notoriety. So I do not know what Miss Tsarnaeva's mental state is. But do we think she believes that her sons are truly innocent, or is this a sort of shock reaction where she is outside of herself?
I think she could be in denial. I think this, we see this a lot with children or young adults or, full-grown adults who commit crimes like this. The parents just have this instinctive reaction to defend them no matter what. I think it's a pretty common thing.
You've said, Lewis, that if you found out that your parents, for example, had committed some crime, that if you felt that it was indeed a heinous crime, that you would not hesitate to cooperate with police and to turn them in. If you had a kid, maybe accidentally, things work out, you love the kid, great. If you find out that your kid has been involved in a crime like this, how do you determine what to do?
I think it would depend on the crime. I think if it were intentional, malicious, and approaching this level, I'd like to think that I would be able to keep a level head and do what is necessary.
Yeah, and I think, until you're in that situation, it is really hard to truly know how one would act. Send me your thoughts on this on Twitter, twitter.com/dpacman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We are now trying very short membership pitches. If the results are as good or better than with the longer pitches, we'll keep shortening them, Lewis. This program depends on member support. Today's new member of the day is Jenna Ryan, and joining Jenna today is Andrew Rusk, entering the Membership Hall of Fame, who's been with us for 4 years. He now gets a free David Pakman Show apparel item. Support our show at davidpakman.com/membership. Remember that if you ever shop on Amazon.com, you can use the Amazon banner at davidpakman.com, bookmark it, and use it whenever you shop. A whole bunch of Negima manga and also anime being purchased through our link lately. Are you into this stuff, Lewis?
I have never heard of this one. I mean, there's certainly some anime that I've watched and enjoyed, but
generally, though, are you into the format, the genre?
I mean, I guess, yeah. I mean, I like the the violent stuff, like the Akira-esque stuff, and things like that.
I really liked Spirited Away by Miyazaki, and I've seen one other Miyazaki. I am actually kind of open to checking out some more anime type films, but I just don't know what to check out, right? I know very little about it, and there's just so much out there that I end up checking out nothing. So if there's something like on Netflix that I should look at that the audience knows about, let me know. I'm really interested by the format, but I just don't really know what to choose if I'm only going to look at one or two things.
I think your options are pretty limited on Netflix. I've tried to browse that stuff on Netflix, and I couldn't really find anything that I thought looked good, but hopefully it is out there.
And remember that if you ever shop on Amazon.com, go to our website first, davidpakman.com, click and bookmark the link to Amazon that's on the right side of the page, and it supports our show. The implosion of the Rand Paul Republican presidential campaign continues. Now Rand Paul's campaign has been outed for using German stock photographs and placing them as so-called Rand Paul supporters on his website. Most politicians will tell you that honesty is important to them, that their campaigns are very honest, and that while governing, honesty would be very important. It's often not true, and it seems that Rand Paul also has a sort of honesty deficiency, we could call it. BuzzFeed uncovered that pictures of supposed Rand Paul supporters displayed over a map of the United States on his campaign website were not actually pictures of Rand Paul supporters. They may have been pictures of people who have not even heard of Rand Paul, because the pictures came from a German stock photography website and were originally taken by an Italian photographer named Andrea Piacquadio. BuzzFeed reached out to the Rand Paul campaign for comment. Maybe not surprisingly, the Rand Paul campaign did not respond at all. But not much later, those pictures were conspicuously removed, Lewis, from the Rand Paul website. Rand Paul has a long history of deception and lies and plagiarism. He plagiarized from movie scripts for his speeches. He plagiarized from Wikipedia for his speeches. He took pictures of people from a German stock photography website and put them on his website as so-called supporters of his campaign. The Rand Paul campaign so far is the most likely to create jobs because of all of the fact checkers that are going to need to be hired to keep on top of his campaign.
It is a total joke. Correct me if I'm wrong. Wouldn't it have just been easy to have one of your staffers with a cell phone take pictures of your supporters at an event and maybe put those on the website?
Absolutely. It's not even heavy lifting not to do this.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it's so confusing. It just seems like the laziest moves you've ever seen in a campaign.
I get that people use stock photography for things, but if you're a presidential candidate, you need to be sure that when there's pictures of supporters on your website, they're actual supporters, rather than people who may never even have heard of who you are because they were people photographed for a stock photo website in another country. Just horrible embarrassment after horrible embarrassment for Rand Paul. And even more trouble for Rand Paul. Continuing, Rand Paul did an interview with CNN's Dana Bash, and we know that Rand Paul is the self-proclaimed champion of freedom and liberty, and he's all about so-called freedom and liberty as he sees it. But he really fell apart when he did this interview with Dana Bash, and he tried to explain how he is both a libertarian, but he at the same time is trying to appeal to Republican voters who don't approve of same-sex marriage. And he explained how he's in favor of people just being left alone, but at the same time, he's okay with states telling gay couples they can't get married. Try to follow the trapeze artist-like actions that he went through here in this interview with Dana Bash. Check it out.
Let's talk about a social issue, gay marriage. In New Hampshire, you said, "I will fight for your right to be left alone." I realize that you believe gay marriage is a state issue, but Why do you believe, just as a core principle, as a libertarian, that people should be left alone, but not when it comes to their right to marry somebody they love?
I do believe people ought to be left alone. I don't care who you are, what you do at home, or who your friends are, where you hang out, what kind of music you listen to. What you do in your home is your own business. That's always been who I am. I am a leave me alone kind of guy.
But not when it comes to marriage.
Well, no. I mean, states will end up making the decisions on these things. I think that there's a religious connotation to marriage. I believe in the traditional religious connotation to this, but I also believe people ought to be treated fairly under the law. I see no reason why, if the marriage contract conveys certain things, that if you want to marry another woman, that you can do that and have a contract. But the thing is the religious connotation of marriage that has been going on for thousands of years, I still want to preserve that. And you probably could have both. You could have both traditional marriage, which I believe in, and then you could also have the neutrality of the law that allows people to have contracts with another.
How can you be a libertarian and want to allow religion to influence civil law around marriage? This guy is a total sham, Lewis. He made the analogy that just like he thinks people should be able to decide what type of music they listen to, they should be able to decide who to be with, be it man, woman, whatever. But he also says he agrees with states deciding on gay marriage and allowing religion to influence those states' decisions on gay marriage. So why do the states get to decide who you can marry, but not which music you listen to, right? If he is using the analogy of, hey, what music you listen to or who you marry should be completely up to you. No government, be it state or federal, should be able to decide that. But states should be able to decide whether you can marry someone who's the same gender as you. Does anyone else see the logical bankruptcy of this argument?
Well, probably not his supporters. He also brings up the civil union thing, which I thought was pretty much long gone. I didn't know we were having that conversation anymore.
Yeah, it's like a 10-year-old thing where I want anybody to do whatever they want, but marriage has a definition, but people should have freedom. So let's create this other thing, but I'm for small government, but at the same time, it's okay to create completely new definitions of things under the law, but small government, right? It's this complete inconsistency that I agree with you, Lewis. I thought we were done talking about civil unions. It's how can anyone support a guy who is so blatantly pandering?
I don't know. We'd have to ask some of those supporters or some of those Germans from the stock photo website. I just love watching him implode. I love watching his campaign implode, and I'm curious to see what's next.
I think he announced last Tuesday. So we're basically on day 7 today. At the end of today, it will be the completion of day 7 of Rand Paul's campaign. There's been 10 or 12 embarrassments already, just logical inconsistencies, plagiarism, ridiculous statements about, and we'll talk about some of these tomorrow, that he'll just shut down all NSA surveillance, which I don't deny he would like to do, but it's absurd to say that that's what you would do on day 1 of your presidency. Just a stunning embarrassment of a campaign. It's grotesque. It is magnificent and it's exquisite, all in its own way, Lewis. And I have to say, I'm enjoying it quite a bit.
If anything, we're going to have a great example of how not to run a campaign that will be used for decades to come.
Next, we will talk to Sheila Carapico about what's going on in Yemen and why is the U.S. still allied with Saudi Arabia, who is taking an increasingly hawkish role there. That's coming up next. Make sure to get on our Reddit discussion forum, davidpakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Sheila Carapico, professor of political science and international studies at the University of Richmond in Virginia. Recently wrote a piece called A Call to Resist Saudi and U.S. Aggression in Yemen. For folks who have not been following the latest details of the story, let's start there. What is the latest in Yemen?
Well, we're now into the 3rd week of a Saudi-led so-called coalition of airstrikes, predominantly in Yemen against a group known in English as the Houthis, who succeeded in convincing the erstwhile transitional president Mansour Hadi to leave the capital in Sana'a, and then he left Aden, and then he left Aden and went to Saudi Arabia. So currently the Saudis are striking the Houthis in cities basically across the country. It's a very dire situation at the moment.
And Pakistan's defense minister said to Parliament that Saudi Arabia had actually gone to Pakistan asking for aircraft, warships, soldiers. So there's every indication here that Saudi Arabia is at least nominally interested in expanding this military action, is there not?
There is indeed. He's also gone, they've also approached the Egyptians, who have been much more forthcoming. I mean, the Pakistan story is very interesting on two levels. One is that at least it's been reported that the Saudis asked for only Pakistani Sunnis and not Pakistani Shia to go and fight a war on behalf of Saudi Arabia in Yemen, where frankly Pakistanis don't have much at stake at all. And then the second thing is that the Pakistanis have been beneficiaries of an awful lot of Saudi foreign aid, Saudi Arabia, of course, being a very wealthy country that uses its wealth to curry favor and gain influence in various countries. So the rebuff from Pakistan, which appears to have been driven by popular resistance or opposition, I think it's better to say, to joining a Saudi campaign in Yemen, is interesting. The Egyptians, on the other hand, seem quite keen to go along with the Saudi campaign, and they again are beneficiaries of a lot of Saudi assistance.
For many years, we've been speaking with pretty significant concern about the U.S.-Saudi alliance, and I've been calling it an oppressive and extremist regime for a long time. You wrote that Saudi Arabia is an oppressive reactionary regime, which is quite similar to my view on this. Talk about that a little bit. Why does this U.S.-Saudi alliance seem to persist when at face value you would think that Saudi Arabia is the type of regime with which the U.S. would have significant conflict? Is it oil? Is it shared interests for stability in the region?
I referred to it in that piece as an oil for guns bargain. So I think it has something to do with oil, but it also clearly has to do with the fact that the Saudis are a major customer for American high-tech weapons from Raytheon and McDonnell Douglas and other American and British arms manufacturers. And unlike some other recipients of American weapons, like Egypt or Israel, where we mainly give these weapons to them, the Saudis pay hard cash. So between the fact, the oil part at the moment seems a bit less compelling, but again, it's kind of an oil for weapons deal, and the United States, I think, wants to maintain a strong relationship with Saudi Arabia and the other monarchies of the Arabian Peninsula, again, as your question poses, in spite of the fact that their human rights and civil rights and democratic liberties are an embarrassment.
So based on your current sort of assessment of the importance of the oil piece, sometimes we will hear that if the U.S. were not so dependent, or at least not so much dependent on Saudi oil, because the percentage of oil used in the U.S. from Saudi Arabia is actually not quite so high, but at least tied in with Saudi Arabia with regard to the stability of world oil prices, that if it were not for that, that the U.S. might more easily be able to break the alliance. But I'm not hearing from you that that's really the top priority, nor the top factor that seems to keep this alliance going.
Well, I mean, this year there have been a couple of developments in oil markets which are interesting. I mean, of course, the price is plummeting. And by many accounts, that's because the U.S. in particular has been successful in developing new technologies like fracking, so that there's a relative glut of oil on the world market and the price is down. Now, one thing historically about Saudi Arabia is that they were always considered to be, the phrase that was always used was that they were a swing producer. So that meant that when the price went down, they would cut production, and when the price rose, they would increase production in order to keep prices relatively stable, which is important to American manufacturers and the transportation industry, particularly airlines, so that prices are not fluctuating in a destabilizing way. This year, the Saudis have not acted as a swing producer, have not done what one might have expected in light of past behavior. In other words, now that the price is down, they have refused to cut production. And this is kind of a complicated story, but I'll just add one or two more sentences, which the United States would want them to do, to cut production, to keep prices up, so that the cost of producing oil from shale through fracking in the United States would keep it economically viable. But, in a way, that's asking the Saudis basically to subsidize the fracking industry. And anyway, for whatever reason, they have not done so. So the oil part of it is less compelling this year than it was, say, in the 1970s or, again, at various periods in the past 30, 40 years.
To play devil's advocate, would there be any way that you could imagine justifying the U.S. alliance with Saudi Arabia in a way that would not make it so overtly hypocritical and a double standard, given the barometer or the litmus test that is applied to other nations in the region? In other words, if I said to you, carte blanche, come up with a way in which this alliance is not an incredible double standard based on what American foreign policy values have been asserted to be, are you even able to do that, or is this truly equally confusing to you?
Well, it's a stretch beyond credulity to find a kind of ethical imperative to the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia. It's conceivable, I suppose, that a national interest argument can be made apart from the oil for arms deal, which I still think is the most compelling of the arguments. But, Saudi Arabia is stable. It's very wealthy. It buys its population off. And it's a loyal ally of the United States, very much under the American security umbrella, along with, again, the other small oil monarchies of the Arab side of the Gulf, so Qatar and Kuwait and Bahrain and the Emirates, to some extent Oman. So, there's that argument in terms of stability. Saudi Arabia is clearly, and this goes back to the Yemen situation, was very much a counter-revolutionary force in during the Arab uprisings. And so, I think defenders of the Saudi-American alliance would see it in terms of stability and, again, the economic benefits of oil and arms, but they would certainly not make a case based on women's rights or prisoners' rights or use of corporal punishment or elections or a decent judiciary or freedom of the press. None of those things exist in Saudi Arabia.
No question about that. A very, very interesting topic. We've been speaking with Sheila Carapico, professor of political science and international studies at the University of Richmond in Virginia. Thank you so much for being on with us.
My pleasure.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
As we've said before, abortion is, while a controversial medical procedure among the anti-choice crowd, it is a very, very safe medical procedure. And one of the reasons it's so safe is because there are so many great OBGYN programs around the country. And now anti-abortion advocates are going after one of those top OBGYN programs to try to get them to stop teaching future doctors how to even perform abortions. There's a North Carolina bill, HB 465, which has a provision which I must say is buried pretty deep, which specifically stipulates, quote, no department at the medical school at East Carolina University or the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill shall permit an employee to perform or supervise the performance of an abortion as part of the employee's official duties. The internal logic is we don't waste state funds on abortion, and these two universities are state schools, thus they shouldn't be teaching how to do abortions. As it happens, the UNC Chapel Hill program is one of the top 5 OBGYN residency programs in the country. Very important program, especially since there's a growing shortage of abortion providers in the country. And they've actually instituted something called the Ryan program at UNC Chapel Hill, which provides additional opportunities to be trained in abortion. It has a family planning fellowship, which involves abortion training and more. The school is doing very, very good things. And now, Lewis, right-wing legislators are specifically targeting it. Small government, but they want to now dictate the specifics of what is taught at medical schools. They know better than doctors about what should be taught at medical school.
Now we've seen this battle happening on just about every front. I don't think we could. I don't think there's anything else to cover, really. So they've tried to destroy this at every possible chance they've had. And if the school pushes back against this, I mean, is it just going to be the medical school that pushes back against this? Will the university as a whole push back against this?
It should be the university as a whole that recognizes this is an attack on academic freedom. This is an attack on so many elements of what should be an independent education system in that state. And UNC Chapel Hill is a terrific school with a terrific OBGYN program. And the most disturbing thing about this is that studies show that when you make it difficult to get a legal and safe abortion, you don't reduce the number of abortions, you reduce the number of legal and safe abortions, right? Whether you make abortion illegal, or you reduce the number of places where you can have an abortion, or like this, reducing the number of people qualified to perform abortions by preventing a medical school from teaching abortion, all you're doing is increasing the number of unsafe abortions. And it's really appalling and dreadful and despicable that the right-wing anti-choicers don't recognize this by now. That the way to prevent abortion is by preventing unwanted pregnancy, not by banning abortion.
Well, they don't want, there's the abstinence-only education. They don't want to give out contraception, and they don't want there to be abortions. I think they feel this guilt when these things are happening, these right-wing legislators in their country. And I think that if these abortions are happening illegally and there are people dying from them and that type of thing, they'll say, well, hey, that's not on us. It's not our fault. I don't know. I think there's a guilt. I think there's some weird guilt there when this is happening legally in their state.
Bo sent me an interesting story about a Tea Party false flag. It's not what you think. Usually the Tea Party is alleging that other things were false flag attacks, but we have an actual false flag that was one that the Tea Party set up. The Tea Party of Miami put up they did a whole display, a whole protest to oppose what they call a land grab, which would see 46,000 acres of sugar farmland restored for Everglades conservation. Not a bad thing. The problem is that the so-called protesters were actors being paid $75 each to show up and appear to be protesting. The protest was on Thursday outside of the South Florida Water Management District, and it was staged by the Tea Party of Miami and a group called Florida Citizens Against Waste. And they put up a Facebook ad calling for actors. They've since deleted that Facebook post after it leaked that those weren't actually protesters. Let's take a look at the video. Maybe you buy it that these are real protesters.
This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the Colombian waters, from the Redwood Forest to the New York Islands. This land was made for you and me.
This money represents the over $2 billion of taxpayers' money that's going to be wasted if the Everglades land purchase goes through.
So there was a Facebook post which said, political rally protesters needed. It offered $75 for up to 40 actors to show up from 8:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. They were not including breakfast, Lewis, in that compensation plan. They basically had to stand holding banners and signs that would be provided. They could wear whatever they want, and they would get $75 cash. I have to admit, looking at the clip, those people do look super confused about what on earth they're doing there.
Confused and not very enthusiastic. So,
No.
So the acting is actually, it's not good acting, I think we could say.
They should have upped it to $150 for the actors. Maybe they would have gotten more convincing so-called protesters. Not that we needed any more proof that the Tea Party is the farthest thing from a grassroots movement, but here is a little bit more proof. I actually wonder how many of the so-called actors were opposed to the message that they were supposedly in support of. Maybe they distanced themselves and they said, hey, I'm playing a role here, the same way that I might play the role of someone who has a political belief that differs from mine. I'm just acting here.
The Koch brothers, I think, if they could have, they could hire A-list celebrities to be in these protests. That would be some great acting, and I think it'd be a lot more believable.
Isn't it just bizarre and absurd that the Tea Party has to resort to this? If it were such a strong feeling that the residents of the area were against conserving these 46,000 acres of sugarland, you'd think that they would be able to get actual protesters out, as opposed to having to offer $75 to people who show up and act like they're in a time warp, right? These people look so confused about what they're even doing.
Isn't that the epitome of the Tea Party? I mean, funded by billionaires from the start, just throw money at something, create it, and create a monster.
If you have any comments about our program, you can call our voicemail number, which is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail we received. Take a listen.
Hey, David and Lewis. I was watching a show where you were talking about the mandatory vaccinations if kids are going to go to a public school. I think I understand this. If the person is not vaccinated, the kid, he's the only one at risk, right? He or she. Everybody else is vaccinated. And so what's the problem? If they choose not to be vaccinated and they get sick, they can't pass it to anybody because those people have already been vaccinated.
No, so you fundamentally misunderstand just the basics of vaccination. There's something called herd immunity. Not everybody can be vaccinated. If you are immunosuppressed or for other reasons, you can't be vaccinated. In addition, you also don't have 100% success. The vaccine is not 100% effective. So it's very important to have a threshold that differs depending on the vaccine we're talking about, so that you prevent the spread when you could consider those for whom the vaccine will not be effective, because as I mentioned, it's not 100% effective, and those who cannot be vaccinated. So this is one of the main misunderstandings, Lewis, around vaccination, that, hey, the only people at risk from choosing not to vaccinate are those who choose not to vaccinate.
Yeah, it is a little more complicated than that. But yeah, I think you explained that well.
On today's bonus show, a Russian man is set to become the first head transplant patient. Pacific Gas and Electric has been fined $1.6 billion. And we will talk about observing evolution in cave crustaceans. I also have some phone numbers for the IRS scammers, and we're going to try to call a couple of them and see if we can get any of them on the phone. Bonus show. Got to be a member. DavidPakman.com/membership to sign up. You won't regret it. Speak to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.